I called the police on my own brother after he hit my child and said, "You think $20 is going to fix this?" They had no idea what was coming next. I'm Sarah, 32, female. And my brother just slapped my 8-year-old daughter across the face in front of our entire family, while calling us both useless. The sound of his hand meeting Emma's cheek still echoes in my mind 3 days later, but honestly, I should have seen this coming. Michael has been building up to this moment for years. My brother Michael has always been the golden child. At 35, he's a successful corporate executive with a corner office, a luxury car, and our parents' unwavering approval. I'm an elementary school teacher who chose passion over profit, and in my family's eyes, that apparently makes me a failure. The favoritism started early and never stopped. I remember when I was 12 and Michael was 15, I had spent weeks working on a science fair project about renewable energy. I was so proud of my solar-powered model house, complete with tiny LED lights that actually worked. When I showed my parents, Dad barely glanced up from his newspaper and mumbled, "That's nice, honey." But when Michael walked in with a participation trophy from his baseball team's pizza party, suddenly the whole house erupted in celebration. Mom hung that cheap plastic trophy on the mantle like it was an Olympic gold medal. The pattern continued through high school. When I made honor roll, it was expected. When Michael scraped by with C's, it was because he was well-rounded and focused on leadership. I got a full scholarship to study education. But all anyone talked about at family dinners was how Michael got into business school, even though my parents had to take out loans to pay for it. Then there was my wedding day. David and I had planned a simple, beautiful ceremony. We saved for 2 years to afford something modest but meaningful. Michael gave a speech as my man of honor since we didn't have any sisters. And instead of celebrating our love, he spent 5 minutes talking about how Sarah finally found someone patient enough to put up with her perfectionist tendencies, and how David must really love her to deal with all her quirks. The room laughed, but I saw David's jaw tighten. Later, he told me he wanted to punch Michael, but I begged him to keep the peace. When Emma was born, I thought things might change. I hoped becoming an uncle would soften Michael's edges. For a while, it seemed like it did. He'd bring her expensive toys and would post pictures with her on social media, calling himself Uncle Mike. But as Emma grew older and developed her own personality, Michael's true colors started showing again. Emma is quiet and sensitive. Nothing like the boisterous, attention-seeking child Michael had been. She loves to draw and read, preferring coloring books to sports equipment. At family gatherings, while Michael's friends' kids would be running around making noise, Emma would sit quietly in the corner with her sketch pad, creating beautiful little drawings of flowers and animals. Last Christmas, Emma had drawn a picture of our whole family for everyone's gifts. She spent hours on each one, carefully coloring inside the lines and adding little details she thought each person would like. When she gave Michael his picture, he glanced at it for exactly 3 seconds before setting it aside and saying, "That's colorful." Meanwhile, he gushed over the expensive watch his wife Jessica had bought him, holding it up for everyone to see and going on about its features for 20 minutes. I watched my daughter's face fall, and something inside me cracked a little, but I bit my tongue, like I always do. Because keeping peace in the family has been my job since childhood. The breaking point had been building for months. Every family gathering became an exercise in watching Michael dismiss Emma while praising other children for doing exactly the same things she did. When his friend's son would draw a picture, Michael would call it artistic genius. When Emma drew something, it was nice at best, ignored at worst. 3 weeks ago, at my parents' anniversary dinner, Emma had been excited to show everyone a story she'd written at school about a brave princess who saved her kingdom with kindness instead of fighting. She'd even illustrated it herself. When she tried to share it with Uncle Mike, he was on his phone, barely listening. Hey, he mumbled without looking up. "Sounds great, kiddo." But when his business partner's son mentioned he was playing Little League, Michael launched into a 20-minute conversation about baseball statistics and how important sports were for character development. He completely ignored Emma for the rest of the evening. David noticed everything. That night, as we drove home with Emma asleep in the backseat, he finally said what I'd been thinking. "Sarah, your brother treats you and Emma like you're invisible, and your parents just let it happen. It's just how he is," I said, the same excuse I'd been making for years. "He doesn't mean anything by it, doesn't he?" David asked quietly, because from where I'm sitting, it looks pretty intentional. I knew David was right, but confronting Michael felt impossible. He had this way of making me feel like I was overreacting, like I was being too sensitive. Whenever I'd tried to address his behavior in the past, he'd laugh it off or turn it around on me. "Come on, Sarah, I'm just joking around. You need to lighten up." Then he'd ruffle my hair, like I was still 12 years old. And somehow, I'd end up apologizing for bringing it up, but now, sitting here 3 days after the incident, I realize that all those years of small dismissals and casual cruelty were leading up to this moment. Michael didn't just wake up one day and decide to slap my daughter. He'd been building up to it, testing boundaries, seeing how much he could get away with. And the worst part, I let him. The family barbecue was supposed to be a celebration. My dad had just retired after 35 years as an accountant, and Mom wanted to throw him a big party with all the relatives, neighbors, and family friends. She'd been planning it for weeks, sending out invitations, ordering a custom cake, and coordinating with everyone to bring side dishes. Emma had been looking forward to it for days. She'd picked out a special sundress with little sunflowers on it and had made Grandpa a handmade card with a drawing of him fishing, which was his favorite hobby. She'd practiced writing "Happy Retirement" in her best cursive and had even added glitter to make it sparkle. David and I arrived early to help set up. The backyard looked beautiful, with string lights hanging between the trees and tables covered in checkered tablecloths. Mom had outdone herself with the decorations, and there was a genuine warmth in the air that made me hopeful this would be one of those good family memories. Michael and Jessica pulled up in his brand new BMW just as the first guests were arriving. He was carrying his laptop bag, which immediately annoyed me. Who brings work to their father's retirement party? But I pushed down my irritation and reminded myself to focus on Dad and making this day special for him, Uncle Mike. Emma ran up to greet them, her sundress twirling as she moved. She'd been excited to show him her card for Grandpa and a new drawing she'd made of the whole family at the beach. "Hey there, Em," Michael said absently, not really looking at her as he scanned the yard for the best table to set up his laptop. "I just need to find somewhere to get some work done. I've got a presentation Monday and the slides aren't finished." "Michael," Jessica said quietly, "it's your dad's party. Can't the work wait? This is $1 million client, Jess. Dad will understand." He chose a table near the patio, away from the main crowd but with access to the outdoor electrical outlet. "Besides, I can multitask." I watched Emma's excitement deflate a little as Michael immediately opened his laptop and started typing. Barely acknowledging her presence, she stood there for a moment, holding her drawings, before slowly walking back to where David and I were arranging food on the buffet table. "Maybe Uncle Mike will look at your pictures later," I told her, giving her shoulder a gentle squeeze. "It's okay, Mommy," she said with the kind of resignation that no 8-year-old should have. "He's busy." The party got into full swing over the next hour. Dad was in his element, telling retirement stories and showing off the fishing gear his coworkers had given him as a goodbye gift. Mom was beaming, playing the perfect hostess and making sure everyone had enough food and drinks. Emma found her place in the gathering. As she always did, she set up her art supplies at a small side table and started drawing pictures of the party. Several of the older guests stopped by to admire her work, and I could see her confidence returning as they praised her artistic skills. "She's got real talent," said Mrs. Henderson from next door. "Look at how she captured the way the light comes through the trees. That's not easy to do." Emma glowed under the attention, and for a while, everything felt normal and happy. Dad came over to see her latest creation and was genuinely delighted with the retirement card she'd made him. "This is going right on the refrigerator at home," he told her, giving her a big hug. "It's the best gift I got today." I felt a surge of pride watching my daughter connect with her grandfather. This was what family was supposed to feel like, but Michael remained glued to his laptop, occasionally taking phone calls and walking away from the group to talk business. I could see Jessica getting more embarrassed as the afternoon went on, making apologetic comments to relatives about his work demands. Around 3 o'clock, Emma decided she wanted to get a juice box from the cooler. She was excited because Mom had bought the fancy organic ones with fun straws that she usually only got as special treats. She carefully selected a tropical punch flavor and was concentrating hard on getting the bendy straw inserted properly. The cooler was positioned right next to Michael's table. He was deep in typing, his fingers flying across the keyboard as he worked on what looked like a complex presentation with charts and graphs. Emma got the straw in successfully and took a happy sip of her juice. She was walking back toward the art table when she tripped slightly on an uneven patio stone. It wasn't a bad fall, just a little stumble that happens to kids all the time. But the juice box in her hand squeezed, and a stream of tropical punch shot out, landing directly on Michael's keyboard. The juice soaked into the keys immediately, and Michael's laptop screen flickered and went black. The silence that followed was deafening. Everyone in the immediate area had seen what happened, and all conversations stopped as Michael stared at his computer in disbelief. "Oh no," Emma whispered, her eyes filling with tears immediately. "I'm sorry, Uncle Mike. I didn't mean to. I tripped. And are you kidding me right now?" Michael's voice was cold and sharp, cutting through Emma's apology like a knife. He stood up so quickly his chair nearly fell over. "Do you have any idea what was on that computer?" "Michael," I said, moving toward Emma, "it was an accident. She's just a kid. Just a kid." His face was turning red now, and there was something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Pure rage. Just a kid who just destroyed 3 days of work, and probably cost me a client. "I'm sorry," Emma kept saying, tears streaming down her face now. "I'm really, really sorry. I can help clean it up. I can, you can." "What?" Michael stepped closer to her, towering over my small daughter. "You can magically bring back my presentation. You can explain to my boss why I won't have the proposal ready Monday morning." "Michael, stop," David said firmly, moving to stand between him and Emma. "You're scaring her. She should be scared," Michael shouted, loud enough that the entire party was now staring at our corner of the yard. Maybe if someone taught her to be more careful, to watch where she's going, this wouldn't have happened. That's when something inside me snapped. "Don't you dare," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "Don't you dare blame her for your decision to bring work to a family party." Michael's attention turned to me then, and his expression grew even darker. "Of course, you'd take her side. Of course, you'd make excuses for her, just like Mom and Dad always made excuses for you. What is that supposed to mean?" "It means that apple doesn't fall far from the tree, Sarah. You were a careless, clumsy kid who never paid attention to anything but yourself, and now you're raising one just like you." The cruelty in his voice was like a physical blow. This wasn't just anger about the computer anymore. This was years of resentment and contempt finally spilling out. "That's enough," David said, his voice deadly quiet. "Apologize to my daughter right now." Michael laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Apologize? For what?" "For telling the truth." That's when Emma, still crying, tried one more time to make things right. She walked up to Michael with her small hand extended, holding the $20 bill she'd gotten from Grandpa for her birthday the week before. "Uncle Mike, I can pay for your computer," she said in a small, broken voice. "I have money. I'm really sorry I broke it." And that's when Michael lost whatever was left of his self-control. What happened next will be burned into my memory forever. Michael looked down at Emma's outstretched hand holding her $20 bill, and instead of seeing an 8-year-old child trying desperately to make amends for an honest mistake, I watched his face twist with contempt. $20, he said, his voice dripping with disgust. "You think $20 is going to fix this?" Emma's lower lip trembled, but she held her ground, still offering her birthday money. "It's all I have," she whispered, "but I can ask Daddy for more, or maybe I can do chores. You know what your problem is?" Michael crouched down to Emma's eye level, and my stomach dropped as I realized what was about to happen. I started moving toward them, but I was too far away, blocked by other guests who were frozen in shock. "Your problem," Michael continued, his voice getting louder, "is that nobody has ever taught you that actions have consequences. Nobody has ever taught you to take responsibility for the damage you cause." "Michael, that's enough," Mom said sharply from across the yard, finally recognizing that this had gone too far. But Michael wasn't done. He stood back up, towering over Emma again, and that's when he said the words that shattered everything. "You know what? Like mother, like daughter. Both of you are completely useless." The entire party went dead silent. Even the kids who had been playing stopped their games to stare. I felt like all the air had been sucked out of the world. Emma looked up at him with those big brown eyes full of confusion and hurt, and I could see her trying to process what her uncle had just said to her. This man she'd always looked up to, who she'd made drawings for, who she'd been so excited to see, had just called her useless. "I'm not useless," she said in the smallest voice I'd ever heard from her. "I try really hard to be good." And that's when Michael's hand came down. The slap echoed across the yard like a gunshot. Emma's head snapped to the side, and she stumbled backward, her hand flying to her cheek as she started crying harder than I'd ever seen her cry. For a split second, the world seemed to stop. No one moved, no one breathed, no one spoke. Then everyone started moving at once. David reached Emma first, dropping to his knees and gathering her into his arms. "I've got you, baby girl," he whispered fiercely, checking her face while shooting a look at Michael that could have melted steel. "Daddy's got you." I was right behind him, my hands shaking as I gently touched Emma's reddened cheek. The outline of Michael's fingers was clearly visible on her pale skin, and seeing it made something primal and protective surge through me. "How dare you," I said, standing up and turning to face my brother. "How dare you lay a hand on my child?" Michael was already backing away, and I could see the realization of what he'd done starting to hit him, but instead of apologizing, instead of showing any remorse, he doubled down. "She needed to learn," he said, but his voice wasn't as strong as it had been moments before. "Kids today don't respect anything because parents like you never discipline them." Discipline. David stood up, still holding Emma, and his voice was dangerous. "You call slapping an 8-year-old girl discipline?" Mikael, Jonathan Williams' mom's voice, cut through the chaos like a whip. She was standing by the patio door, her face white with shock and anger. "What have you done?" Dad was right behind her, looking older than I'd ever seen him. "Son, that was completely unacceptable." "Oh, now you all care," Michael said, and I could hear the years of entitlement in his voice. "Now you all want to act like I'm the bad guy? But where were you when she destroyed my computer? Where was the accountability then? She's 8 years old." I screamed, all the years of suppressed anger finally exploding out of me. "She's a little girl who made an accident, and you slapped her. You actually hit my daughter." Several of the guests were already gathering their things, clearly uncomfortable with the family drama that had erupted. Others were trying to comfort Emma, who was still sobbing in David's arms. Mrs. Henderson approached us cautiously. "Sarah, honey, do you need me to call someone? The police or no?" I said quickly, though part of me wanted to say yes. "We're handling this as a family." But even as I said it, I realized that was exactly the problem. We'd been handling things as a family for years, which really meant enabling Michael's behavior and sweeping his cruelty under the rug. "I think you all need to calm down," Jessica said, speaking up for the first time. She looked embarrassed and uncomfortable, but she was clearly trying to defend her husband. "Michael's under a lot of stress at work. And the computer really did have important files." "Don't," David said, cutting her off. "Don't you dare try to justify what just happened." "I'm not justifying anything," Jessica said defensively. "I'm just saying that maybe we all need to take a step back and what?" I turned on her now, all my rage and hurt finding a new target, and pretend this didn't happen, and make excuses for why it's okay that my brother slapped my child. Emma lifted her head from David's shoulder and looked at me with those tear-filled eyes. "Mommy, why did Uncle Mike hit me? What did I do wrong?" Hearing her ask that question, hearing the confusion and self-blame in her voice, broke something inside me that I didn't think could be fixed. "You didn't do anything wrong, sweetheart," I said, kneeling down so I was at her level. "Nothing at all. Grown-ups should never hit children, even when they're angry. What Uncle Mike did was wrong, not what you did." I looked up at Michael as I said this, making sure he heard every word. He was standing there with his arms crossed, still defiant, still acting like he was the victim in this situation. "Are you seriously going to make me the villain here?" he said. "I'm not the one raising a child with no sense of boundaries or consequences. The only person here with no sense of boundaries," Dad said quietly, "is you, son. You just hit your niece at my retirement party, in front of the entire family." Michael's face flushed again. "So now you're taking her side too? Perfect, just perfect." "There are no sides here, Michael," Mom said, her voice shaking. "There's right and wrong, and what you did was wrong." "Fine," Michael said, grabbing his laptop bag and slinging it over his shoulder. The broken computer made a sad rattling sound. "You all want to gang up on me over an accident. You want to act like I'm some kind of monster for trying to teach a child about responsibility? Fine, we're leaving." "Good," I said before anyone else could speak. "And don't come back until you're ready to apologize to my daughter." Michael stopped walking and turned back to me, his face twisted with anger and hurt. "You know what, Sarah? I'm done trying to help you raise her. I'm done pretending like you know what you're doing. You want to raise a spoiled, careless kid Who thinks $20 fixes everything? Go ahead, but don't come crying to me when she grows up to be just as much of a disappointment as her mother. The words hit me like physical blows, but this time, instead of crumbling like I always did, I stood taller. Get out, I said quietly. Get out of here now before I call the police and report you for assault. Michael's eyes widened slightly. I don't think he'd ever heard me speak to him like that before. You wouldn't dare. Try me. For a moment, we stared at each other across the yard, and I could see him weighing whether I was serious. Finally, he turned and walked toward the gate, Jessica trailing behind him, looking mortified. This isn't over, Sarah, he called back. Family is family, and eventually, you'll need to get over this. No, I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. I really won't. As their car pulled away, I realized I was shaking. Emma was still crying softly in David's arms, and the party was effectively over. Guests were quietly saying their goodbyes to my parents, offering sympathetic looks and awkward condolences as if someone had died. And in a way, someone had. The version of myself that had spent 32 years making excuses for Michael, that had taught my daughter to expect less love and attention than she deserved, that had stayed quiet in the name of family peace, that person was gone. The next few hours passed in a blur of ice packs, gentle reassurances, and phone calls I wasn't ready to make. David carried Emma inside while I helped my parents clean up the disaster that the party had become. Most of the guests had left quickly, after the incident, taking their barely touched plates of food and their shocked expressions with them. The ones who stayed did so quietly, helping fold chairs and pack up decorations without making eye contact. Emma's cheek had swollen slightly, the red handprint fading to a purplish bruise that made my stomach turn every time I saw it. David had immediately gotten ice from the freezer, and Emma sat curled up on Grandma's couch, holding the makeshift ice pack while Mom fussed over her with the kind of attention she usually reserved for Michael. I'm so sorry, sweetheart, Mom kept saying, stroking Emma's hair. I'm so sorry that happened to you. Emma was calmer now, but I could see the confusion still lingering in her eyes. She kept touching her cheek gingerly, as if she couldn't quite believe what had happened. Grandma, she said quietly, is Uncle Mike going to say sorry? Mom looked at me helplessly, and I realized she was waiting for me to provide the same kind of optimistic reassurance we'd always given about Michael's behavior. He didn't mean it. He was just having a bad day. He'll apologize when he calms down. But I couldn't do it anymore. I don't know, baby, I said honestly, sitting down next to her on the couch. Sometimes, grown-ups do things that are wrong, and they don't apologize even when they should. But why? Emma asked, the universal question of childhood innocence, confronting adult cruelty. Sometimes people get so caught up in being angry that they forget how to be kind, I said, trying to find words that an 8-year-old could understand. And sometimes people think they're more important than other people's feelings. Dad came in from the backyard, looking exhausted and older than his 70 years. Well, that's the last of it, he said, settling heavily into his armchair. I've never seen anything like that in my life, haven't you? The words came out of my mouth before I could stop them. Dad looked at me with surprise. What do you mean? I mean, haven't you seen Michael treat people badly before? Haven't you noticed? The way he talks to me, the way he ignores Emma, the way he acts like he's better than everyone else. The room went quiet, except for the sound of the ice maker cycling in the kitchen. Sarah, Mom said carefully, I know you're upset about what happened, and you have every right to be, but Michael has always been ... intense. It's just his personality. Intense. I felt that familiar anger rising again. Mom, he slapped my daughter. Your granddaughter. He left a bruise on her face. I know, and it was terrible, Mom said quickly. I'm not defending what he did. But Michael's under a lot of pressure at work, and losing that computer. Stop. David's voice cut through Mom's explanation like a blade. He was standing in the doorway, and his expression was harder than I'd ever seen it. Just stop making excuses for him. I'm not making excuses, Mom protested. I'm just trying to understand you're doing exactly what you've always done, David said, and I could hear 37 years of frustration in his voice. You're explaining away Michael's behavior instead of holding him accountable for it. I stared at my husband in surprise. David was usually the peacekeeper in family situations, the one who stayed quiet and let me navigate the complicated dynamics. But something about seeing Emma get hurt had unleashed something protective and fierce in him. David, Dad said with a warning tone, I think everyone's emotions are running high right now. Maybe we should all take some time to calm down before we say things we might regret. No, David said firmly. I've been calm for 8 years. I've been calm while I watched Michael dismiss my wife and ignore my daughter. I've been calm while you all treated Sarah like she was lucky to be included in this family instead of recognizing that you're lucky to have her. Emma was watching this conversation with wide eyes, and I could see her trying to process this adult conflict that was so different from the usual family dynamics she was used to. Maybe we should take Emma home, I said quietly. She's been through enough today. No, Mommy, Emma said, surprising all of us. I want to stay with Grandma and Grandpa. I want to make sure they're okay. My 8-year-old daughter, with a bruise on her face from her uncle's hand, was worried about taking care of other people. The realization hit me like a truck. Baby, it's not your job to take care of the grown-ups, I said gently. We're supposed to take care of you. But everyone seems sad, Emma said in that matter-of-fact way children have. And Uncle Mike seemed really angry. Maybe if I draw him a picture, he won't be angry anymore. The innocent hope in her voice broke my heart all over again. Even after what Michael had done to her, she was trying to find a way to fix things, to make everyone happy again. Emma, I said, taking her small hands in mine. What Uncle Mike did wasn't your fault, and it's not your job to make him feel better about it. Do you understand that? She nodded, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. This was a conversation we were going to have many more times. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Michael. I hope you're happy. You turned the whole family against me over an accident. But don't worry, I won't be bothering you or your precious daughter anymore. I showed the text to David, who read it and shook his head in disgust. An accident, he said. He's calling what he did an accident. He's never going to admit he was wrong, I realized out loud. He's never going to apologize. Then that tells you everything you need to know about his character, Dad said quietly. I looked at my father with surprise. For a moment, it seemed like he might actually be willing to hold Michael accountable. Dad, I said carefully, are you saying you think Michael was wrong? Dad was quiet for a long moment, looking at Emma with her ice pack and bruised cheek. Finally, he sighed deeply. I'm saying that no adult should ever lay a hand on a child in anger, he said. What Michael did was unacceptable, and there's no excuse for it. It was the strongest statement I'd ever heard my father make against Michael's behavior, and I felt a small spark of hope. So what happens now? Mom asked. We can't just pretend this didn't happen. No, we can't, I agreed. And I won't. What does that mean? Mom's voice was worried. It means I'm done pretending that Michael's behavior is acceptable. I'm done making excuses for him, and I'm done exposing Emma to his cruelty. But he's family, Mom said, as if that explained everything. Family doesn't get to hurt each other without consequences, David said firmly. And family especially doesn't get to hurt children. Emma had been listening to this entire conversation, and now she spoke up in her small, clear voice. I don't want to see Uncle Mike anymore, she said. He scared me. The simple honesty of her statement hung in the air like a verdict. Okay, baby, I said, pulling her close. You don't have to see him if you don't want to. But what about Christmas? Mom asked. What about family gatherings? I don't know, I said honestly. I guess we'll figure that out as we go. But even as I said it, I knew things could never go back to the way they were. The protective bubble I'd built around the idea of family harmony had finally burst, and there was no putting it back together. That night, after we got Emma home and settled into bed with extra hugs and her favorite stuffed animals, David and I sat in our living room trying to process what had happened. I keep thinking about her offering him that $20, David said quietly. That broke my heart. Mine too, I admitted. She was trying so hard to make it right. You know what the worst part is? David said. This isn't the first time he's been cruel to her. It's just the first time he left a mark. I knew he was right. I thought about all the times Michael had dismissed Emma's drawings, ignored her attempts to connect with him, or made cutting comments about her personality. I'd always told myself it wasn't that bad, that Emma was resilient, that family was complicated. But seeing her face today, seeing her confusion and hurt and her immediate instinct to blame herself, I realized I'd been wrong to minimize it. I failed her, I said, the words coming out as barely a whisper. No, David said firmly, taking my hand. Michael failed her. Your parents failed her by enabling his behavior. But you protected her today. You stood up to him. I should have done it years ago, maybe, David said. But you did it when it mattered most. As we sat there in the quiet of our living room, I made a decision that would change everything. Michael wanted to pretend this was just a family disagreement that would blow over in time. He wanted to go back to the way things had always been, with everyone making excuses for his behavior and me staying quiet to keep the peace. But I was done with that version of our family. It was time for some consequences. The next morning, Emma woke up and immediately ran to the bathroom mirror to look at her cheek. The bruise had darkened overnight, and seeing her examine it with such clinical detachment made my heart ache. "Does it hurt, sweetheart?" I asked, finding her there. "A little," she said honestly. "But it looks worse than it feels." The fact that my 8-year-old was trying to reassure me about her own injury was both heartbreaking and infuriating. Over breakfast, Emma was quieter than usual, pushing her pancakes around on her plate instead of eating them. "I keep thinking about yesterday," she said finally. "Why was Uncle Mike so angry about his computer?" "It was an accident." David and I exchanged glances. We'd talked late into the night about how to handle this conversation. Sometimes when people are really focused on something they think is important, they forget that people are more important than things, I said carefully. "Uncle Mike was so worried about his work that he forgot you matter more than any computer." "But I ruined his work," Emma said, and I could hear the guilt creeping into her voice. "No," David said firmly, setting down his coffee cup. "You had an accident. There's a big difference between doing something on purpose and having something happen by accident." "Your daddy's right," I said. "And even if you had spilled that juice on purpose, which you didn't, hitting you still wouldn't have been okay." Emma considered this for a moment. "So grown-ups aren't allowed to hit kids even when they're really, really mad." "That's right," I said. "Grown-ups should never hit children. Ever." "What about when I hit Tommy Henderson at school last year, when he was being mean to Lucy?" I smiled slightly at her reference to the incident where she'd pushed a boy who was bullying her friend. "You got in trouble for that, remember? Because hitting isn't the right way to solve problems, even when we're trying to protect someone." "But Uncle Mike didn't get in trouble," Emma observed with the devastating logic of childhood. "Yet," David said quietly, and something in his tone made me look at him sharply. After Emma went to play in her room, I cornered David in the kitchen. "What did you mean by yet?" I asked. David was loading the dishwasher with more force than necessary. "It meant that maybe it's time Michael faced some actual consequences for his behavior." "What kind of consequences?" David straightened up and looked at me directly. "I think we should file a police report." The suggestion hit me like a physical blow. "David, no. It's family. We can't." "Why not?" David's voice was calm but determined. "If a stranger had slapped Emma, would you hesitate to call the police? That's different, is it? Because from where I'm standing, the fact that it was her uncle makes it worse, not better." She trusted him. She looked up to him. I sank into a kitchen chair, feeling overwhelmed. My parents would never forgive me. "Sarah," David said gently, sitting across from me, "your parents failed to protect their granddaughter yesterday. They watched their son slap an 8-year-old child, and their main concern was making excuses for him. They were in shock." "Were they? Or were they just doing what they've always done when Michael crosses a line?" I knew David was right, but the thought of involving the police in a family matter felt like crossing a line I couldn't uncross. "What would that accomplish?" I asked. "It's not like they'd arrest him." "Maybe not," David admitted. "But it would create an official record. It would send a message that his behavior has real-world consequences, and if he ever tries something like this again?" The implication hung in the air between us. My phone rang, interrupting the conversation. It was Mom. "Sarah, honey, I've been thinking about yesterday all night," she said without preamble. "I think we all need to sit down and talk this through as a family." "What's to talk through, Mom?" "Michael hit Emma." "I know, and that was wrong. But tearing the family apart isn't going to solve anything." I felt the familiar pressure to be the peacekeeper, to smooth things over and make everyone comfortable again. But this time, I resisted it. "I'm not tearing the family apart," I said firmly. "Michael did that when he chose to hit my daughter. He's your brother, Sarah. He's always been there for you, has he?" The question came out sharper than I intended. "When has Michael ever been there for me, Mom? Really?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "He helped you move when you bought your house," Mom said finally. "He complained the entire time about how I should have hired professional movers instead of asking family for help," I reminded her. "He gave you career advice when you were deciding between teaching positions, He told me I was stupid for choosing the elementary school over the high school because elementary teachers get less respect and worse pay. Another pause. Sarah, I know Michael can be difficult sometimes, but he's family, and families work through their problems together. Some problems, yes, I said, but not this one. Not assault. Don't be so dramatic. It was one slap. The casual way she dismissed what had happened to Emma made my blood boil. One slap that left a bruise on my daughter's face, I said coldly. One slap that taught her that the adults in her life will hurt her when they're angry. One slap that she remember for the rest of her life. You're being overly emotional about this. Am I? Or are you being under-emotional about your granddaughter being assaulted by your son? Mom was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was strained. What do you want me to say, Sarah? That I think Michael is a terrible person. That I'm going to cut him out of my life over one moment of poor judgment. I want you to say that you're more concerned about protecting Emma than you are about protecting Michael's feelings. Of course I'm concerned about Emma, but I'm concerned about Michael too. He's going through a difficult time at work, and losing that computer. Stop, I said, cutting her off. Just stop. I can't listen to you make excuses for him anymore. So, what are you saying? That you never want to see your brother again? I'm saying that I won't expose my daughter to someone who thinks it's acceptable to hit her, and I won't pretend that what happened yesterday was anything less than what it was. And what was it? Child abuse? The words hung in the air like a bomb. I'd never said them out loud before, but hearing myself say them, I knew they were true. Sarah, that's a very serious accusation. It's not an accusation, Mom. It's a fact. An adult hit a child in anger. That's the definition of child abuse. But he's family. Family doesn't get to abuse children, I said, echoing David's words from the night before. After I hung up, I felt drained but also oddly relieved. For the first time in my life, I'd refused to minimize Michael's behavior or make my parents feel better about enabling it. David looked at me expectantly. So, he said, the police report. I thought about Emma examining her bruise in the mirror this morning. I thought about her offering Michael her birthday money to fix the computer she'd accidentally damaged. I thought about her asking why he was so angry, and whether grown-ups were allowed to hit children. Okay, I said finally. Let's do it. That afternoon, while Emma was at a playdate with her friend Lucy, David and I went to the police station. The officer who took our report was professional and kind, but I could see the skepticism in her eyes when we explained that the perpetrator was Emma's uncle. Has there been any previous history of violence in the family? Officer Martinez asked. No, I said, then paused. Not physical violence. But there's been a pattern of emotional cruelty, I guess. Can you elaborate on that? I found myself describing years of dismissive comments, ignored achievements, and casual put-downs that I'd never really thought of as abuse before. But saying them out loud to a police officer, they sounded different, worse. What outcome are you hoping for with this report? Officer Martinez asked. I want there to be a record, I said. I want it documented that this happened, in case it happens again. Do you believe your brother poses an ongoing threat to your daughter? I considered the question seriously. I don't think he would hit her again, I said slowly, but I think he would continue to be emotionally cruel to her, if given the opportunity. Officer Martinez made notes in her report and explained that she would be contacting Michael for his statement. She warned us that filing the report might escalate family tensions. It might, I agreed. But family tensions are less important than my daughter's safety. As we left the police station, I felt like I'd crossed some invisible threshold. There was no going back now? That evening, my phone exploded with angry text messages from Michael. I can't believe you called the police on me. Over an accident. You've lost your mind, Sarah. This is exactly what I should have expected from you. You always were the victim in everything. I hope you're happy. You've destroyed this family over nothing. David read the messages over my shoulder and shook his head. Still not taking any responsibility, he observed. Still calling it an accident, I added. But the message that hurt the most came from Jessica. I know you're angry, but involving the police was going too far. Michael is devastated. He loves Emma, and you know he would never intentionally hurt her. Please reconsider what you're doing to this family. Even Michael's wife was asking me to prioritize his feelings over Emma's safety. That night, as I tucked Emma into bed, she asked me a question that broke my heart. Mommy, are you in trouble for telling on Uncle Mike? What do you mean, sweetheart? Grandma called and she sounded upset. And I heard you and Daddy talking about police. Are you in trouble because of what happened to me? I sat on the edge of her bed, looking at this brave, perceptive little girl who was somehow worried about getting other people in trouble for her own assault. No, baby, I said firmly. I'm not in trouble. Sometimes, when something bad happens, grown-ups have to make hard decisions to keep kids safe. That's what I'm doing, making sure you're safe. Even if it makes other people mad. Even if it makes other people mad. Emma nodded solemnly, then snuggled deeper into her blankets. I love you, Mommy, she said sleepily. I love you too, sweetheart, more than anything in the world. As I turned off her light and closed her door, I realized that for the first time in my life, I was putting my daughter's well-being ahead of my family's comfort. It was terrifying and liberating at the same time. 3 days after I filed the police report, Michael showed up at our front door. I was folding laundry in the living room while Emma did homework at the kitchen table when the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I could see my brother standing on the porch, looking haggard and angry. My first instinct was to not answer the door. David was at work, and I didn't like the idea of confronting Michael alone with Emma in the house. But ignoring him felt like cowardice, and I was done being a coward. Emma, I called to the kitchen, go to your room and close the door, please. But I'm doing my math homework, she protested. Take it with you. I need to talk to someone at the door. Emma had become sensitive to tension in the house since the incident, and she immediately picked up on the seriousness in my voice. She gathered her papers and pencils without further argument and headed down the hall. I waited until I heard her bedroom door close before opening the front door. Michael looked terrible. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his clothes were wrinkled, and there were dark circles under his eyes that suggested he hadn't been sleeping well. We need to talk, he said without preamble. I don't think we do, I replied, keeping my hand on the door handle, ready to close it if necessary. Sarah, this has gone far enough. The police called me yesterday. They want me to come in for questioning. Over an accident. It wasn't an accident, Michael. You chose to hit my daughter. I lost my temper for 1 second. 1 second, Sarah, and you're trying to destroy my life over it. I studied my brother's face, looking for any sign of remorse or understanding about what he'd done. All I saw was self-pity and anger. I'm not trying to destroy your life, I said calmly. I'm trying to protect my daughter. From what? From me. I'm her uncle, for God's sake. I love that kid. People who love children don't hit them. Michael ran his hands through his hair in frustration. It was one slap, Sarah. One slap because she destroyed 3 days of work and potentially cost me a major client. Any reasonable person would understand that I was under enormous pressure. Any reasonable person would understand that 8 children have accidents and that hitting them is never an appropriate response. Fine, Michael said, his voice getting louder. Fine, maybe I overreacted. Maybe I shouldn't have hit her. Is that what you want to hear? What I want to hear is a real apology, I said. To Emma, not because you got in trouble, but because you hurt her. I'll apologize to Emma. I'll buy her something nice, take her somewhere special. But you need to drop this police thing. It's gone too far. I shook my head. The police report stands, and you don't get to see Emma until you've gotten some serious help dealing with your anger. Help! Michael's voice cracked with disbelief. You think I need therapy because I disciplined a child who was being careless and destructive. I think you need help because you think hitting an 8-year-old constitutes discipline. She spilled juice on a $20,000 computer. She's 8 years old. We were both raising our voices now, and I was acutely aware that Emma might be able to hear us from her room. You know what your problem is, Sarah. Michael stepped closer to the door, and I instinctively moved to block his entry. Your problem is that you've always been jealous of me. You've always resented that I was more successful, that Mom and Dad were proud of me. This isn't about you and me, Michael. This is about you hitting my daughter. Everything is about you and me. It always has been. You've been looking for an excuse to cut me out of your life for years, and now you think you have one. The accusation stung because there was a grain of truth in it. I had been hurt by his treatment of me over the years, but that didn't mean I was wrong about this. You're right, I said, surprising him. I have been hurt by the way you've treated me. For years, you've made me feel like I wasn't good enough, like I was a disappointment to the family. But this isn't about that old hurt, Michael. This is about the fact that you slapped my child and left a bruise on her face. So what do you want from me? Michael asked, and for the first time, his voice sounded less angry and more desperate. What will it take for you to drop this whole thing and let us go back to being a family? I want you to take responsibility for what you did, I said. Real responsibility, not maybe I overreacted or I was under pressure. I want you to admit that hitting Emma was wrong. Period. No excuses. Michael was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him wrestling with something internal. And then, he asked finally, and then I want you to get help. Anger management, therapy, whatever it takes to make sure this never happens again. And if I do that, you'll drop the police report. I shook my head. The police report stays, but if you do those things, if you really change, then maybe someday we can talk about you having a relationship with Emma again. Michael's face darkened. Someday, maybe. You're talking about keeping me away from my niece indefinitely. I'm talking about keeping my daughter safe from someone who thinks it's acceptable to hit her. I made one mistake. A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk from the store, Michael. A mistake is double booking a lunch meeting. Hitting a child isn't a mistake. It's a choice. Michael stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him realizing that I wasn't going to back down this time. The old Sarah, the one who always gave in to keep the peace, was gone. Fine, he said finally, his voice cold. If that's how you want it, but don't expect me to come crawling back when you realize how wrong you are about all of this. I won't, I said simply. Michael turned to leave, then stopped and looked back at me. You know, Sarah, I used to think you were just weak. But now I realize you're actually vindictive. You're using Emma to get back at me for every perceived slight over the years. The accusation hit me like a slap, but I forced myself to stay. .com. If that's what you need to tell yourself to avoid taking responsibility for your actions, then go ahead, I said. But deep down, you know the truth. You hit an 8-year-old child because you were angry about a computer. And instead of being horrified at yourself, you're angry at me for not letting you get away with it. Michael's face flushed red. You're going to regret this, Sarah. When Mom and Dad take my side, when the rest of the family realizes how unreasonable you're being, you're going to regret burning these bridges. Maybe, I said. But I'll never regret protecting my daughter. After Michael left, I leaned against the closed door, shaking. The confrontation had been even more difficult than I'd expected, not because of his anger, but because of how completely unrepentant he remained. Mommy. Emma's voice came from behind me. She was standing in the hallway, clutching her stuffed rabbit. How much did you hear, sweetheart? I heard Uncle Mike, she said quietly. He sounded really mad. I knelt down and opened my arms, and Emma ran into them. Are you okay? I asked, holding her tight. I'm okay, she said. But Uncle Mike still sounds angry about his computer. Uncle Mike is angry about a lot of things, I said carefully. But none of them are your fault. I know, Emma said, and she sounded so much older than 8. Daddy explained it to me. He said that when grown-ups can't control their feelings, sometimes they blame kids for things that aren't really the kids' fault. I pulled back to look at her face. Daddy's very smart. Will Uncle Mike ever not be angry anymore? It was such a hopeful question, filled with the kind of forgiveness that only children possess. I don't know, baby, I said honestly. I hope so. But until he learns how to handle his anger better, we need to keep some distance from him. Emma nodded solemnly. To stay safe, I confirmed. That evening, when David came home from work, I told him about Michael's visit. How are you feeling about it? He asked. Angry, I said, and sad, and relieved. Relieved, because now I know for certain that I made the right choice. He's not sorry, David. He's not even close to being sorry. He's just angry that there are consequences for his actions. David nodded grimly. Did he threaten you at all? Make you feel unsafe? No, nothing like that. He was angry, but not physically threatening. Mostly he just tried to make me feel guilty for overreacting. The classic abuser response, David observed. Make the victim feel like they're the problem. I realized David was right. This wasn't just about one incident of hitting Emma. This was about a lifetime pattern of emotional manipulation and control that I'd finally stopped enabling. My phone's been buzzing all day, I told David. Texts from Mom, Jessica, even some of the relatives who were at the party. They all want me to work things out with Michael. What are you going to tell them? The truth, I said. That I'm not interested in working things out with someone who hits children and refuses to take responsibility for it. David smiled at me. and there was pride in his expression. "I'm proud of you," he said. "I know this isn't easy." "It's not," I admitted. "Part of me keeps waiting to feel guilty, to start second-guessing myself. But every time I look at Emma, every time I remember the sound of that slap, I know I'm doing the right thing." That night, as I was getting ready for bed, Emma appeared in my doorway in her pajamas. "Mommy, can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetheart. If Uncle Mike says sorry, will everything go back to normal?" I sat down on the edge of my bed and patted the space next to me. Emma climbed up and snuggled against my side. "What do you mean by normal?" I asked. "Like before, when we would see him at Grandma's house and he would sometimes look at my drawings." The wistful hope in her voice broke my heart. Even after everything that had happened, she still wanted her uncle's approval and attention. "I don't think things can go back to exactly the way they were," I said gently. "But if Uncle Mike really understands that what he did was wrong, and if he gets help to make sure it never happens again, then maybe we can find a new kind of normal. A safe normal, safe normal," I confirmed. Emma was quiet for a moment, processing this. "I think I like safe normal better anyway," she said finally. As I tucked her back into bed, I realized that Emma, at 8 years old, had already learned something it had taken me 32 years to understand. That feeling safe was more important than keeping everyone else comfortable. And for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt genuinely hopeful about our future. 6 months later, our new normal was still evolving, but it was definitely safer. Michael never did come in for police questioning. According to Officer Martinez, he hired a lawyer who advised him not to speak with police without legal representation. The investigation remained open but inactive, creating an official record of the incident without leading to charges. For a while, this frustrated me. Part of me wanted to see Michael face real consequences for what he'd done. But over time, I realized that the most important consequence had already occurred. Emma was safe from his anger and manipulation. The family dynamics shifted dramatically in the months following the incident. Mom and Dad initially tried to pressure me to reconcile with Michael, but when I held firm, something unexpected happened. Dad started really listening to what I was saying about the pattern of Michael's behavior over the years. "I've been thinking about what you said," Dad told me during one of our weekly phone calls, "about Michael always being intense, and us making excuses for him, and I think you might be right. I think we let him get away with treating people badly because we were proud of his professional success." It wasn't a complete vindication, but it was more acknowledgement than I'd ever received before. Mom took longer to come around. She continued to hope for a reunion between Michael and me well into the fall, but when she saw how much happier and more confident Emma became without Michael's constant criticism and dismissal, even she began to understand. "Emma seems so much more herself lately," Mom observed during one of our visits. "She is," I agreed. "She's not walking on eggshells anymore, trying to earn approval from someone who is never going to give it." The most surprising development was Emma's artistic confidence. Without Michael's dismissive comments about her drawings being just okay or his complete lack of interest in her creative work, Emma flourished. She started taking art classes at the community center, and even had one of her paintings selected for display at the local library. "Look, Mommy," she said excitedly, pointing to her painting of a sunset over the ocean hanging in the children's section. "Mrs. Peterson says I have a real eye for color." Watching her beam with pride, free from the fear that someone would diminish her accomplishment, made every difficult conversation and family conflict worth it. David and I also grew stronger as a couple through this experience, seeing him stand up for Emma so fiercely, watching him refuse to enable the family dysfunction, deepened my respect and love for him. "You know what I realized?" he told me one evening as we watched Emma playing in the backyard, completely absorbed in creating an elaborate chalk mural on the patio. "What's that?" I realized that before this happened, I was enabling them to. I was staying quiet and letting you handle all the family drama because it was easier than confronting the dysfunction. You were trying to be supportive. "I was being a coward," David said honestly. "I should have spoken up years ago when I saw how Michael treated you and Emma." "Well, you spoke up when it mattered most." We both did. As for Michael, the months of silence stretched on without any indication that he was getting the help he needed or developing any real understanding of what he'd done wrong. Jessica occasionally sent updates through family channels, mentioning that he was doing well at work and that they were focusing on their own lives. There was never any mention of therapy, anger management, or even basic acknowledgement that hitting Emma had been wrong. Then, just before Emma's 9th birthday, something unexpected happened. I was at the grocery store when I ran into Jessica in the cereal aisle. We hadn't spoken directly since the day of the incident, and seeing her was jarring. "Sarah," she said, looking uncomfortable. "How are you?" "I'm well," I said carefully. "How are you?" "I'm okay." She hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" "Somewhere private." We found a quiet corner near the pharmacy, and Jessica looked around nervously before speaking. "I need you to know that I've been thinking about what happened at your dad's party," she said quietly. "A lot." I waited, not sure where this was going. "At first, I was angry at you for involving the police. I thought you were overreacting, trying to punish Michael for being stressed about work. And now," Jessica was quiet for a long moment. "Now I have a different perspective." "What changed?" "We've been trying to have a baby," Jessica said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And a few months ago, I started thinking about what kind of father Michael would be, what kind of father someone who hits children would be." The admission hung in the air between us. "I started paying attention to how he handles frustration," Jessica continued. "Really paying attention. And Sarah, I don't think I want him around children when he's angry." I felt a mixture of vindication and sadness. Vindication because someone who knew Michael well was finally seeing what I'd been trying to explain. Sadness because Jessica had to contemplate having children with him to understand the problem. "Have you talked to him about getting help?" I asked. Jessica shook her head. "I've tried. But he still insists that what happened with Emma was just a one-time thing, that you're being unreasonable. He won't even consider therapy." "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. "I'm the one who should be sorry," Jessica said. "I should have supported you that day instead of making excuses for him." Emma was hurt, and I was more worried about Michael's reputation than her safety. It was the first real apology I'd received from anyone in Michael's circle, and it meant more than I could express. "Thank you for saying that," I said. "Can I ask you something?" Jessica said. "Do you think Emma is better off without Michael in her life?" I considered the question seriously. "I think Emma is better off without the version of Michael who hit her and refused to take responsibility for it. If he ever becomes someone different, someone who can treat her with respect and kindness, then we could revisit the situation." Jessica nodded slowly. "That makes sense. What will you do?" I asked. "About the baby situation. I mean, I don't know," Jessica admitted. "I love him, but I can't bring a child into a home where hitting is considered acceptable discipline." As we parted ways in the parking lot, I felt a strange mix of emotions. I was glad that someone close to Michael was finally seeing the truth about his character. But I was also sad that it had taken the prospect of having children for Jessica to really understand the severity of what he'd done to Emma. That evening, I told David about the encounter with Jessica. "How do you feel about it?" he asked. "Validated," I said. "And sad for her. It can't be easy to realize that the person you're married to might not be safe around children. Do you think she'll leave him?" "I don't know, but I think she'll make whatever decision is best for protecting any future children." Which is more than I can say for my parents. Speaking of my parents, they had gradually come to accept our boundaries around Michael. Dad, in particular, seemed to understand that protecting Emma was more important than maintaining family harmony. "You know, Sarah," he said during one of our conversations, "I've been proud of you for many things over the years. But I'm most proud of how you handled this situation. Really, it took courage to stand up to Michael, to stand up to your mother and me, and to put Emma's safety first even when it meant family conflict. It was the kind of validation from my father that I'd wanted my whole life. And receiving it now felt like a gift." As Emma's 9th birthday approached, she asked if we could have a party with just our closest friends and relatives, the people who made her feel loved and celebrated. "What about Uncle Mike?" she asked, not out of hope but out of genuine curiosity about the logistics. "What about him?" I asked back. "Will he be sad that he's not invited?" The question showed such emotional maturity from my 9-year-old daughter. "He might be sad," I said honestly. "But Uncle Mike made choices that led to this situation. And our job is to make sure you feel safe and happy, not to manage other people's feelings." "I do feel safe," Emma said confidently. "And happy." "Good, that's what matters most." Emma's birthday party was small but perfect, surrounded by people who truly celebrated her creativity, her kindness, and her unique personality. She glowed with confidence and joy. as I watched her laughing with her friends and proudly showing off her latest artistic creations to her grandparents. I realized that we had indeed found our new normal. It was smaller than our old family circle, but it was infinitely safer and more genuine. That night, as I tucked Emma into bed after her party, she surprised me with a question. "Mommy, do you think Uncle Mike knows that hitting people is wrong?" "Now, I hope so, sweetheart. But I don't know for sure." "I hope so too," Emma said. "Because maybe if he learns that, he can be happy again." Even after everything that had happened, my daughter was still capable of hoping for her uncle's redemption. Not because she wanted him back in her life, but because she wanted him to be a better person. It was a lesson in grace that humbled me. "You have such a kind heart," I told her. "I learned it from you," she said simply, as I turned off her light and closed her door. I reflected on how much had changed in the past year. I'd lost a brother, disappointed my parents, and fractured family relationships that had seemed unbreakable. But I'd gained something invaluable, the knowledge that I could protect my daughter, even when it was hard, even when it cost me, even when everyone else thought I was wrong. And Emma had gained something too, the understanding that she deserved to be treated with respect and kindness, that her safety was more important than other people's comfort, and that the adults in her life would fight for her when necessary. 6 months after the incident, we were not the same family we had been before. We were better. Now, if you've made it this far in my story, I want to address you directly, because I know many of you might be dealing with similar family dynamics in your own lives. Maybe you have a family member who constantly criticizes your children, or dismisses their achievements, or makes them feel small. Maybe you've been making excuses for this behavior because family is family, or because confronting it seems too hard. I want you to know that it's never too late to start protecting your children from emotional abuse, even when it comes from people who are supposed to love them. You don't owe anyone access to your children, not even family members. Your first responsibility is to keep your kids safe and help them develop confidence and self-worth. It won't be easy. People will tell you you're overreacting, that you're being too sensitive, that you're tearing the family apart. But when you look at your child's face and see them light up, because they're no longer walking on eggshells around someone who makes them feel worthless, you'll know you made the right choice. Trust your instincts. Protect your children. And remember that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your family is to refuse to enable dysfunction. Your children are watching how you handle these situations, and they're learning what kind of treatment they should accept in their own lives. Make sure you're teaching them that they deserve respect, kindness, and safety, because they do, and so do you. After listening to today's story, perhaps it has raised some new questions in your mind. Every day on Reddit, new experiences and moments create fresh stories. We are all human. If you enjoyed this story, feel free to share it. Thank you for your time, and don't forget to keep an eye out for more stories coming soon.